The sky above New York turned an unnatural shade of purple as the massive ship broke through the clouds. Traffic stopped. People stood frozen on sidewalks, phones raised to capture the moment humanity's universe forever changed. In the Pentagon's underground command center, Captain James Miller watched the satellite feed with narrowed eyes. After 15 years in military intelligence, he had prepared for many threats, but not this. "Captain Miller," General Thompson said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "You're needed in briefing room 1. Now." Miller followed her through corridors filled with rushing personnel. Inside the secured room, screens displayed similar ships appearing over London, Beijing, Moscow, and a dozen other major cities. "3 hours ago, we received this transmission," Thompson said, nodding to a technician. The screen flickered, revealing a humanoid figure with pale blue skin, elongated features, and eyes that glowed like amber coals. "People of Earth," the alien spoke in perfect English. "I am Commander Cragg of the Vex Empire. Your planet has been selected for integration into our domain. Your resources will serve our expansion. Resistance is futile but permitted. It will help us measure your species' capabilities." The message ended with coordinates for a meeting. World leaders quickly agreed to send military representatives rather than political figures. Miller stood at the edge of the designated field in Virginia, part of a small delegation. The Vex ship descended with surprising grace for its size. When the doors opened, Miller got his first in-person look at their invaders. Commander Cragg stood taller than any human, flanked by soldiers in armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal. Their weapons hummed with energy that made the air crackle. "We appreciate your diplomatic approach," the human ambassador began, "but Earth is not available for colonization. We propose peaceful." "Your proposal is noted and rejected," Cragg interrupted. "We do not seek permission. The Vex Empire requires your world. You may submit and serve as auxiliary labor, or resist and be eliminated. There must be room for negotiation." The ambassador insisted. Cragg's expression remained unchanged. "Negotiation implies equal standing. You are not our equals. Your technology is primitive. Your defenses are inadequate. Your understanding of the universe is childlike." The meeting ended abruptly when Cragg turned and walked back to his ship. "Combat assessment begins tomorrow at first light. Prepare as you see fit." True to his word, the attacks began at dawn the next day. Vex ships deployed over military installations first, their weapons cutting through defensive systems with terrifying efficiency. Ground forces followed, their armor deflecting most conventional weapons. Miller found himself coordinating response teams from a mobile command center outside Washington. Hour after hour, reports came in of Vex advances across the globe. Their technology outmatched anything Earth could deploy. But as the sun began to set, Miller noticed something strange. "Sir," a young analyst called out, "the Vex forces near Chicago are pulling back." Similar reports came in from other fronts. As darkness fell across each time zone, Vex attacks stopped completely. Their ground troops retreated to their ships, and air units returned to the motherships. "Are they regrouping?" General Thompson asked during an emergency briefing that night. "Unclear," Miller replied, studying the pattern on global maps. "But this happened yesterday too. They attacked until sunset, then withdrew. Every single unit. Conserving resources, recharging something," an officer suggested. Miller shook his head. "Maybe. But look at this satellite thermal imaging. Their ships are maintaining position, but there's almost no movement inside. It's like they've just stopped." As dawn approached on the third day, Miller watched the tactical display with new interest. The moment sunlight touched Vex positions, their forces resumed exactly where they had left off. "There's something about nighttime," he muttered. "Something that makes them stop fighting." It wasn't much, but in a war that seemed unwinnable, Miller had found the first potential weakness of their alien invaders. 3 months into the invasion, Earth was losing. Major cities lay in ruins, millions had fled to rural areas, and the remaining military forces operated from hidden bases, yet humanity fought on with growing desperation. Lieutenant Anna Davis wiped sweat from her forehead as she studied the tactical display in the underground bunker that had become their headquarters. A former night operations specialist with the Rangers, Davis had been tracking Vex movements since the war began. "Captain Miller, I need to show you something," she said, waving him over to her station. Miller looked exhausted. Sleep had become a luxury as he coordinated what remained of their forces. "What have you found, Lieutenant?" "This," Davis said, pulling up a series of time-stamped recordings. "I've been tracking Vex withdrawal times for the past 90 days. They don't just stop fighting at night. They stop at exactly sunset, down to the minute, at each location worldwide." Miller leaned closer. "That's too precise to be a coincidence." "There's more," Davis continued, switching to a different screen. "I placed motion sensors near their camp in the Rocky Mountains. After sunset, there's almost no movement until exactly sunrise. They're completely inactive at night." Miller asked, his tired mind racing with possibilities. "As far as I can tell, yes. It's like they shut down entirely." Miller straightened up, the first hint of hope crossing his face in months. "We need to test this. Immediately." That night, Miller authorized a small team led by Davis to approach the Vex outpost near what used to be Denver. Under cover of darkness, the human soldiers moved silently toward enemy positions. "I count 12 ships and approximately 50 ground units," Davis whispered into her radio. All completely still. The team moved closer, tension building with each step. A Vex soldier stood motionless, its weapon held limply at its side. Its glowing eyes were now dim, showing no response as Davis carefully approached. "They're completely dormant," she reported, "like they're in some kind of sleep mode." Following Miller's orders, the team placed explosive charges on 3 Vex ships and several weapons caches before retreating to a safe distance. When the explosions lit up the night sky, the human soldiers braced for immediate retaliation. None came. The surviving Vex remained motionless, even as their equipment burned around them. Only when the first rays of dawn appeared did they suddenly activate, their movements jerky and confused as they assessed the damage. Operation Night Strike was a complete success, Miller announced to the gathered officers the next morning. "0 casualties on our side, significant damage to the enemy." A murmur of excitement spread through the room, the first good news in months. "From this moment, we change our strategy," Miller continued. "All major offensive operations will occur at night. During daylight, we focus on defense and falling back when necessary." Within 2 weeks, night raids had destroyed key Vex installations across 3 continents. Human forces moved exclusively under darkness, striking with increasing boldness as they confirmed the aliens' nighttime vulnerability. The Vex responded by intensifying their daytime attacks and setting up powerful floodlights around their bases. They appeared increasingly agitated, their previously methodical assault becoming more aggressive and less coordinated. During a particularly successful raid on a Vex communications hub, Davis made another discovery. One of the aliens had been caught in a collapsed structure at sunset, separated from its unit. Unlike its fellows who had simply frozen in place, this one had crawled into a patch of remaining sunlight and curled into a defensive position. "It's not just a tactical choice," Davis told Miller as they reviewed the footage. "They physically can't function without light. It looks almost like they're afraid of the dark." Miller nodded slowly. "If that's true, we need to understand why. Find me someone who can examine one of these things. A scientist, a doctor, someone who can tell us what makes them tick." "I know just the person," Davis replied. "Dr. Tom Reed. If anyone can figure this out, it's him." For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had found not just a way to survive, but perhaps a path to victory. Dr. Tom Reed had been a leading xenobiologist at MIT before the invasion. Now he worked from a repurposed meat locker in an abandoned supermarket. the cool temperature perfect for preserving his latest subject. "I've never seen anything like this," Reed said, carefully examining the Vex soldier that Davis's team had captured during their last night raid. The alien lay motionless on the steel table, its blue skin giving off a faint glow under the examination lights. Miller and Davis stood on the other side of the table, watching Reed's methodical work. The scientist had modified medical equipment to suit his needs, creating a makeshift laboratory that looked both impressive and desperate. "Is it dead?" Miller asked. Reed shook his head. "No, it's in some kind of stasis. Heart rate extremely slow, respiration minimal. But watch this." He dimmed the lights, and the alien skin lost its glow completely. When Reed shined a powerful flashlight on a small section of the Vex's arm, that area immediately began to pulse with renewed energy. "Remarkable," Reed whispered. "Its cells are directly responding to light." Over the next several hours, Reed conducted a series of tests, taking tissue samples and examining them under a microscope. Miller paced impatiently while Davis took detailed notes. "I believe I understand what we're seeing," Reed finally announced. "These beings have photoreceptors not just in their eyes, but throughout their skin and internal organs. Their cells convert light energy directly into biological function, like photosynthesis in plants." Davis asked. "Similar, but much more advanced. It's as if their entire evolutionary history occurred on a planet with constant daylight. They literally power down without it." Reed pointed to strange structures within the alien's eyes. "These receptors are tuned to specific light frequencies. Without those frequencies, their brains can't maintain consciousness." Miller leaned over the alien. "So they physically can't function in darkness." "Precisely," Reed confirmed. "Earth's night cycle is completely foreign to their biology. When darkness falls, they have no choice but to enter this dormant state." The implications were enormous. As Reed explained his findings, Miller began formulating new strategies. Within days, night operations increased tenfold. Human forces moved with growing confidence, reclaiming territory that had seemed permanently lost. The pattern became clear: defend and retreat during daylight, then attack aggressively at night. Military bases installed powerful light-blocking technology to create safe zones even during daytime. Civilian survivors learned to move and work under cover of darkness, adapting to a nocturnal existence. The Vex responded with increasing desperation. They deployed massive floating light arrays to extend their operational hours and concentrated their forces in smaller areas to maintain better defense. 2 weeks after Reed's discovery, Miller stood on a hilltop overlooking what had once been Los Angeles. Below, Vex ships frantically worked to establish a new base, their activities growing more hurried as the sun lowered toward the horizon. "They're racing against time," Davis said, standing beside him. "Every single day." Miller nodded. "And they're losing." As sunset approached, the aliens moved with increasing urgency, rushing to complete defensive positions and retreating to light-filled safe zones. The moment darkness fell, everything stopped. Human forces moved in silently, dismantling Vex equipment and planting explosives with methodical efficiency. By the time dawn broke, they had disappeared back to their hidden bases, leaving destruction in their wake. "We need to take this further," Miller told his officers during a pre-dawn briefing. "Dr. Reed's findings give us an advantage, but the Vex are adapting. We need to strike at their command structure." "Their mothership?" Davis asked. "It never lands. It stays in the upper atmosphere." "Yes," Miller replied, his expression determined. "But even up there, they can't escape Earth's night cycle. We need to find a way aboard while they're vulnerable." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Breaking into the Vex command ship would be nearly impossible, but with what they now knew, it might just be their best chance to end the war. "I'll lead the mission myself," Davis volunteered. Miller studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Start planning. We have one chance to get this right." The small stealth craft rose silently through the night sky, its special coating absorbing radar signals rather than reflecting them. Inside, Lieutenant Davis checked her equipment one last time. Captain Miller sat beside her, his face tense but determined. Dr. Reed occupied the rear seat, surrounded by specialized collection devices. Approaching target altitude, the pilot announced. Mothership will be overhead in 3 minutes. Miller turned to his team. Remember, we have exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes of darkness left. 1 minute late, and we're trapped aboard when they wake up. The massive Vex mothership appeared overhead, a dark silhouette against the stars. During daylight hours, it glowed with pulsing energy and constant movement. Now it drifted silently, like an enormous sleeping beast. There, Davis pointed at a small maintenance hatch they had identified from reconnaissance photos. That's our way in. The pilot maneuvered their craft with precision, matching speed with the mothership. A soft thud confirmed contact as magnetic clamps secured them to the alien vessel. Air analysis shows it's breathable, Reed said, checking his instruments. Similar to Earth's atmosphere, but higher oxygen content. Wearing lightweight tactical gear and carrying minimal weapons, the team moved through the hatch into the Vex ship. Inside, emergency lighting cast a dim blue glow through the corridors, just enough to see by without triggering the dormant aliens. Stay in formation, Miller whispered. Davis, lead the way. They moved cautiously through the ship, passing motionless Vex in various positions. Some stood frozen in mid-stride. Others sat at control panels with their hands still touching the instruments. Their eyes were closed, their skin dull and lifeless without the energizing light they required. It's like a museum of wax figures, Reed murmured, carefully taking readings with his devices. Following the schematics they had pieced together from surveillance, they headed toward the ship's center, where intelligence suggested the command center would be located. Wait, Davis held up her hand. Unlike the rest of the ship, a faint golden glow spilled from beneath a massive doorway ahead. They must have some light source inside, Miller said. Proceed with extreme caution. The door wasn't locked. The Vex never expected intruders while in orbit. When they eased it open, the team froze at the sight before them. The vast chamber contained hundreds of transparent chambers, each bathed in artificial sunlight. Inside each pod, a Vex soldier floated in a clear liquid, connected to tubes and monitoring devices. At the center of the room, a much larger chamber held the unmistakable form of Commander Cragg. It's some kind of life support system, Reed whispered, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. They're keeping their leaders and elite soldiers active during the night cycle. Can they see us? Miller asked, scanning for any sign of awareness. Reed shook his head. I don't think so. The pods seem to be self-contained environments. Davis pointed to a glowing console near the wall. That must be their central database. If I can access it, we might learn everything we need to know about them. While Davis worked on downloading data, Reed carefully collected samples from an unoccupied pod. Miller kept watch, his weapon ready despite the alien's dormant state. I've got it, Davis finally announced. Their entire tactical database, biological information, everything. Just as they prepared to leave, an alarm suddenly blared through the chamber. The lights began to pulse rhythmically, and the liquid in the pods bubbled with increased activity. What did you do? Miller demanded. Nothing. Davis insisted. It must be an automated defense system. Reed checked his watch. We still have 3 hours until sunrise. This is something else. The pods containing the elite Vex soldiers began to glow more intensely. Inside his chamber, Commander Cragg's eyes snapped open. Run, Miller ordered. Back to the ship now. They sprinted through the corridors, the sounds of awakening Vex echoing behind them. The emergency lighting brightened throughout the ship, artificially triggering the aliens' biology. They're creating artificial daylight. Reed gasped as they ran. They're waking up. With the sounds of pursuit growing closer, the team reached their entry point and scrambled back into their craft. The pilot disengaged immediately, sending them plummeting away from the mothership just as the first fully awakened Vex warriors reached the hatch. As their ship descended toward Earth, Davis clutched the precious data against her chest. Was it worth it? She asked, catching her breath. Miller looked at the samples Reed had collected and the drive containing the VEX database. We'll soon find out. The underground war room buzzed with tension as military leaders from around the world gathered via secure video links. At the center of the room, Dr. Reed stood beside a holographic display showing magnified images of VEX cellular structure. What you're seeing is unlike any biology on Earth, Reed explained, his voice steady despite having gone without sleep for nearly 48 hours. The VEX don't just use light. They require it for consciousness itself. Captain Miller and Lieutenant Davis flanked him, both still showing signs of their dangerous mission. A bandage covered a burn on Davis's forearm, while Miller's face bore a fresh cut above his eye. The data we recovered confirms everything, Davis added. The VEX evolved on a planet orbiting a binary star system. Their world never experiences darkness. The display shifted to show a diagram of the alien homeworld, perpetually bathed in light from two suns. Their cells contain specialized organelles that directly convert light energy into neural activity, Reed continued. Without specific light frequencies, their brains simply cannot function. It would be like asking humans to live without oxygen. General Thompson leaned forward. So their retreat at sunset isn't a tactical choice. It's a biological necessity. Exactly, Reed confirmed. Earth's night cycle is completely foreign to their evolution. When darkness falls, they enter a state similar to suspended animation. But we saw some of them awake on their ship, Miller pointed out. Reed nodded. Yes, their elite forces use artificial light chambers to maintain consciousness during our night cycle. But it's expensive technology that consumes enormous energy. They can't equip their entire invasion force with it. The revelation sent a wave of murmurs through the assembled leaders. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had discovered not just a weakness, but an insurmountable biological limitation of their enemy. There's more, Davis said, taking over the presentation. The VEX database reveals something remarkable. In their thousands of years of expansion, they've never encountered a technological civilization on a planet with a day-night cycle. She brought up a star chart showing previous VEX conquests, all planets with either multiple suns or locked in rotations that kept one side perpetually illuminated. They didn't just underestimate us, Miller added. They never imagined finding intelligent life that evolved in darkness. To them, night is a primitive environmental condition that should have prevented advanced civilization. General Thompson stood up, her expression hardening with resolve. How do we use this knowledge to drive them off our planet? Reed switched to a new display showing the specific light wavelengths that powered VEX biology. Their photoreceptors are tuned to very specific frequencies. If we can develop technology to block or disrupt those frequencies, we could essentially create artificial night, even during daylight, Davis finished. For the next hour, they outlined a strategy that would exploit this crucial vulnerability. Scientists would develop special filters to block the light frequencies the VEX required. Military engineers would adapt the technology into weapons, shields, and protective gear. We need to mass-produce these light-blocking technologies immediately, Thompson ordered. Every surviving factory worldwide needs to shift production. As the meeting concluded, Miller remained behind with Davis and Reed, studying the VEX biological data more closely. There's something still bothering me, Miller said quietly. If they're so vulnerable to our night cycle, why choose Earth at all? There must be easier targets. Reed zoomed in on a chemical analysis of Earth's atmosphere. This might explain it. Our planet has rare mineral compositions they need for their technology, and they likely assumed they could simply eliminate us quickly before the night cycle became a significant factor. Davis smiled grimly. They thought we'd be easy prey. Their mistake, Miller replied, his voice firm with new conviction. And our salvation. As they left the war room, the first light of dawn was breaking outside. But for once, the coming daylight didn't fill them with dread. Instead, it brought determination. The Vex had brought war to Earth, believing their superior technology made victory inevitable. They never considered that Earth's most basic feature, its cycle of light and darkness, would become their undoing. The tide of the war was about to turn. The mountain factory that once produced car parts now hummed day and night with a new purpose. Workers moved with urgent precision, assembling devices that could change the course of the war. Captain Miller walked the production line, inspecting the first batch of light disruption grenades. Each contained specially designed crystals that absorbed and scattered the specific light frequencies the Vex needed to function. "How many do we have ready?" he asked the facility manager. 5,000 units completed, another 10,000 by tomorrow," the man replied. "The satellite-mounted versions will take another week." Similar production was happening in hidden facilities around the world. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity's scattered resistance had united with a clear strategy and renewed hope. Outside, Lieutenant Davis supervised the loading of equipment onto transport vehicles. The first major counteroffensive would begin at noon, the time when Vex forces were at their strongest and would least expect an attack. "All teams report ready," she told Miller when he joined her. "Dr. Reed's light-blocking technology has been distributed to all major resistance cells." Miller nodded, checking his watch. "It's time." The convoy moved out, heading toward a major Vex stronghold that had once been downtown Seattle. The aliens had converted it into a processing facility where Earth's resources were being extracted and prepared for transport to their home world. As they approached, Vex patrol ships circled overhead, their sensors scanning for threats. The human forces remained hidden in the ruins, waiting for the signal. "Remember," Miller's voice came through their communication devices, "the light disruption effect only lasts 15 minutes per grenade. Time your attacks carefully." At exactly noon, Davis gave the signal. Hundreds of specially designed launchers fired simultaneously, sending the light disruption grenades into the heart of the Vex facility. The devices detonated in brilliant flashes, releasing clouds of crystalline particles that hung in the air. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Vex soldiers within the clouds stumbled and froze, their movements becoming sluggish as their biology responded to the sudden loss of vital light frequencies. Some collapsed entirely, entering the same dormant state they normally experienced only at night. "First wave, move in," Miller ordered. Human soldiers wearing protective goggles that filtered out the disruptive particles stormed the facility. They faced minimal resistance as they moved through areas where the Vex were struggling to function. In orbit, smaller versions of the technology were deployed against the Vex ships. Specially designed missiles exploded near their hulls, coating them with the light-disrupting material. Several smaller vessels lost power completely, drifting helplessly as their crews shut down. Similar attacks occurred simultaneously worldwide. In Egypt, resistance fighters reclaimed the pyramids. In Japan, Vex processing centers along the coast fell within hours. Across Europe, alien strongholds that had seemed impenetrable suddenly became vulnerable. The Vex responded with desperate measures. Their remaining ships began bombarding Earth with powerful light amplifiers, trying to burn away the disruptive particles. Commander Craig, protected inside his light chamber on the mothership, ordered all elite forces to deploy. "They're bringing in reinforcements," Davis reported, watching as fresh Vex ships descended through the atmosphere. Miller wasn't surprised. "Good. That means they're scared." The battle for Seattle raged through the afternoon. Human forces suffered losses, but pressed on with determination born from months of being on the defensive. By evening, they had secured the processing facility and disabled its machinery. As natural darkness fell, the humans gained even more advantage. The remaining Vex either retreated to their light chambers or froze in place as their biology shut down. In the captured facility's control room, Miller received reports from around the globe. Similar victories were being reported on every continent. The Vex were being pushed back for the first time. "This is just the beginning," Miller told his exhausted but triumphant troops. Tomorrow we launch Phase 2, taking out their orbital support vessels. As night fully descended, Earth's defenders continued working while their invaders lay dormant. The advantage that had seemed like humanity's greatest weakness, the planet's night cycle, had become their most powerful weapon. The tide of war had finally turned. The massive Vex mothership hovered silently above the United Nations building in what remained of New York City. 2 months after humanity's counteroffensive began, the once feared vessel now appeared less threatening, its gleaming hull scarred from battle and partially coated with light-disrupting particles. Captain Miller stood at the window of the temporary headquarters, watching as a smaller Vex shuttle descended toward the designated landing zone. Lieutenant Davis joined him, her uniform now bearing the insignia of Major following her leadership during the successful campaign to reclaim Europe. "Is everything ready?" Miller asked without taking his eyes off the approaching ship. "Yes," Davis replied. "Security teams are in position. Dr. Reed is waiting in the conference room with the scientific delegation." The world had changed dramatically in 60 days. Once humanity discovered and exploited the Vex biological weakness, victory after victory followed. Earth forces had reclaimed major cities, disabled processing centers, and destroyed nearly half the Vex fleet using increasingly sophisticated light disruption technology. 3 days ago, the first communication had arrived from Commander Cragg. Not a threat, but a request for dialogue. "Do you think it's a trap?" Davis asked as they walked toward the conference room. Miller shook his head. "They've lost too many ships and soldiers. Their supply lines are cut, and they know we can now create artificial night even in their highest orbits." The conference room had been carefully prepared. One side featured standard human lighting, while the other contained the specialized light frequencies the Vex required to function. Armed guards lined the walls, each carrying light disruption weapons. Commander Cragg entered flanked by 2 Vex officials. Up close, the alien leader looked less imposing than during their first meeting. His blue skin had dulled, and his posture showed signs of fatigue. "Captain Miller," Cragg acknowledged, his voice lacking its former arrogance. "We appreciate this opportunity to discuss terms." "Commander," Miller replied evenly. "Please be seated." The meeting began with formal presentations from both sides. Dr. Reed explained humanity's understanding of Vex biology, while the alien scientists confirmed and expanded upon his findings. "Our evolutionary path never prepared us for planetary cycles of darkness," one Vex scientist admitted. "In our expansion across 12 star systems, we have never encountered a species that thrived in such conditions." Miller leaned forward. "Yet you came to conquer us without proper understanding of our world." "A significant miscalculation," Cragg acknowledged. "Our preliminary scans showed valuable resources. We assumed any primitive species on a half-dark world would be easily overcome." "You underestimated us," Davis stated. "Profoundly," Cragg agreed. "Your adaptation to darkness, your ability to function when our biology shuts down, gives you an advantage we cannot overcome without complete restructuring of our forces." After hours of negotiation, the terms were clear. The Vex would withdraw entirely from Earth's solar system. They would provide reparations in the form of certain technologies that could help rebuild damaged Earth infrastructure. In return, humanity would cease attacks on their remaining ships and allow them to depart peacefully. "We will add Earth to our registry of prohibited worlds," Cragg concluded, signing the formal agreement. "Your species designation will be updated to Darkness Dwellers, a classification that warns all Vex expeditions to avoid contact." As the meeting ended, Miller and Davis walked the alien delegation back to their shuttle. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landing zone. "Your darkness comes again," Cragg observed, his movements becoming subtly more hurried. "It does," Miller replied. "Every single day." After the aliens departed, Miller stood with Davis watching the shuttle return to the mothership. Within an hour, the massive vessel began moving away from Earth, joined by the remainder of the once formidable invasion fleet. "Do you think they'll honor the agreement?" Davis asked as they watched the ships becoming distant points of light in the evening sky. I do, Miller said. They're logical beings. They understand now that some weaknesses can't be overcome with technology alone. Earth's night will always be our advantage. As darkness fell completely, they turned back toward the city. All around them, lights were coming on in buildings, a sign of human life returning to areas once controlled by the invaders. What happens now? Davis asked. Miller looked at the stars appearing one by one in the night sky. We rebuild. We learn from their technology. And we prepare. For what? For the day we take our place among the stars, Miller replied. But unlike the Vex, we'll go with the understanding that different worlds create different strengths. Our evolution in darkness might seem like a limitation to some species, but as we've proven, it can also be our greatest asset. Around the world, humans emerged from shelters and hidden bases, looking up at the retreating alien ships with a new sense of confidence. Earth had faced its greatest challenge and survived, not through superior technology, but through the unique adaptation to a simple planetary cycle that its people had always taken for granted: the coming of night.